my thumbnail. Done. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm bringing you the 7th episode in my Lips versus Eyes challenge series that I'm doing with Brandy, Shay and Samantha. I'll have all of them linked down below, so make sure you check them out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly run through the palettes we've used for the last 4 weeks, and then I'm going to tackle what we're using for the next few weeks. Now, in saying that, I did take a few photos, but to be honest, I'm really bad at doing that. So I will insert some photos along as we go while I discuss our previously used palettes, but I'm not really sure how many there'll be because I am lacking in the photo taking, skill. So let's get started. So first up we have week 9, and that was a palette that we love because of YouTube, or a palette that we got because of YouTube and we love. Now for that one I went with the Emily Edit the Wants by Revolution. Let me just show you what it looks like on the inside. So that is it there. I love this palette. I know that sometimes the consistency of the shades is not always the best, but I enjoy the color story, I enjoy the meanings behind it, and I definitely prefer this palette over the Needs palette, but we'll get into that one shortly. Next up for week 10 was my biggest palette, and that one is my Revolution Ultimate 144 pan palette. And if you have been following along with my Instagram, you will know that I broke this palette. So I'm definitely looking into options of de-potting and maybe frankening some of these shades, because also this palette, as much as I have enjoyed using it, it is very huge, it's cumbersome, and you can never take it anywhere. And I would say that a high percentage of these shades are basically the same. If not, they're similar enough that it doesn't really matter. You don't need 144 of them. The next palette that I was working on was my least favorite palette, which is this Fantasy Buys palette. It is, let me just take out the little brushes that come with it. So this is what it looks like here. I have managed to hit pan on 4 of the shades in here, but overall I do not love them. They're not the best, they're not the worst, they just are how they are, but this is definitely not my favorite palette. And last but not least, we were working on the palette that is outside your comfort zone, and mine was this Beauty Bay Pastels palette, which is pretty new to my collection. This is what it looks like here. As you can see, I've already made a pretty decent dip in the green shade, which is called Serenity. I really like this shade. The orange shade I did find to be rather chalky, as were a couple of the other shades in here. Some were better than others. I felt that the orange shade was not pigmented enough, in my humble opinion. But I did enjoy this palette. I will say that after using this palette, I have grown a little bit of more appreciation for the Fantasy palette, because I think my thing was I was expecting these shades to be super bright and rainbow, while really they're probably actually more on par with these shades. So this is probably more of a pastel palette, and I'm not sure if that's what they were going for when they created the palettes, but that is what I would say. It's more pastel than rainbow, I guess, and that's probably the same with this one. And I've actually found that they're similar. Some of the shades look quite similar to each other, so that's where I've actually, after using this one, then using the rainbow the pastel palette straight after, I have realized that that's probably how that kind of is. In saying that, I still do not love this palette. It's not my favorite. However, I do think it's probably actually more of a pastel palette than a rainbow palette, as I first thought when I purchased it. So that is all for the palettes that I have already used. Now we're going to be looking for the next few weeks. And I've said few weeks because instead of doing 4 palettes, then 2 palettes, I've decided that I'm going to squish all 6 palettes into this video, and then we're going to do the finale for this project on the Tuesday that is the start of the last week, if that makes sense. You'll see why I have no problems doing it then, once you find out which palette it is, because I'll have a good enough idea of what I'd like to say about that palette before we get anywhere near that week. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through each palette, and then I'm going to put up a picture of swatches of what that palette looks like. And yeah, that's what we're doing. So let's get straight into it. So week 13 is a palette that reminds you of Thanksgiving, be it scent, colour, or otherwise. In Australia, we do not celebrate Thanksgiving, and to be honest, I would have nothing that would remind me of it because I don't really know too much about it, I guess is the way to say it. So I decided instead to stick with the idea of scent, and I went with my only palette that has scent within my collection. Well, a scent that is of food. So I went with the Emco Beauty Just Peachy palette. This smells very much light peach. I'm assuming it probably has a similar scent to what I imagine the Too Faced peach product smells like. That's probably where these guys got that idea. But I do like the smell, and I actually really like this palette. So this is the palette here. This is the palette I've been using for my Do Japan My Battleship game that I've been playing with Ceylan over on Facebook. I'll have Ceylan linked down in the description box down below, so definitely check that out. She is a lot closer to winning this game than I am. Currently, I only have 1 battleship, which is along this top row here. And I do have a hit here, so I know there's a battleship around here, which I think is my 3er, but I don't know if it's this way or this way or this way. So I am on the process. I've got 1 hit on 1 section of my 3er, but I am nowhere near knowing where my 2er is. So basically, I've still got at least 4 more pans to hit before I'll actually complete the game, but Ceylan only has 2 because she is just working on her tour. So I do think that I've probably on the losing end of this game, but you never know because it isn't over until the fat lady sings, and I am not singing. So that is the palette I'm using for week 13. So week 14 is your smallest palette, and for that I decided to go with the Urban Decay the black palette, as it is only a 6-pan palette. So I decided to go with this one because it is probably my smallest number of shades wise. It's physically quite actually a bulky palette, but shade wise I would say it is my smallest palette. Though that also is not including my Maybelline Empowered Plums palette, which I have depotted, so now it is actually in 2 singles. So I decided for this one to class them as singles, though in the eyeshadow tag during the Get Ready With Me I did with Samantha, which I'll have linked up above, I did actually say the Empowered Plums was my smallest. But this time around, I'm going with my Urban Decay, the black palette. Week 15 is a palette that you bought because of YouTube that was a disappointment. And we are going to stick with the Emily Edit theme, as I'm going with the Emily Edit The Needs palette. I was quite disappointed by this palette. Mine is actually broken. The little clasp broke, but that happened after I received it, so that is not a fault of postage or anything like that. However, it doesn't make me happy that it so easily broke, because I actually really like the layout of this palette. So in saying that, this is the palette here. As you can see, I've already got a little bit of pan in here. What I'm actually disappointed in, I do like these face parts, face shadows. That's, I don't even know what it's called right now. Face powders, that's probably the correct word. I do like these face powders, and I really like Joy. I find that's a really nice blush. But I'm actually disappointed in the eyeshadow portion of this palette, because I understand why you want the light shade, and I understand that you got the dark brown and the light brown and this creamy color shade, but then already we've got two versions of a cream. Then on top of that, we've got this random pink, which could be used as a blush, but really, if you wanted a pink, why didn't you just use the blush? And then we have this glittery, shimmery black, which is a gunmetal black, which is quite nice in itself. It's got some pinky pigments in it. Let me just show you on here. But really, what is the point of it? Because how would I use this shade with any of these shades if this palette and this section is meant to be a travel friendly, all-in-one, don't need anything else palette? I would have rather, you can use the highlighter as an inner corner highlight. I understand you don't want a really light shimmer shade, but a shimmer shade that was going to work. And also, I feel like this palette is not friendly. It is designed, and obviously it could be because it is a palette designed by Emily, so therefore it's probably designed more for her as such, as what she would prefer. It is her edit, it is her preferred shades, but I don't think it's very friendly for people with different skin complexions. So it is not my favorite palette, and I have actually taken this away on holiday with me as just a palette, the only thing I took. And though I could make a look out of these, it was really boring, and I did not use these. In fact, I don't think I've used this shade, this black shade, ever. So it was very much a disappointment, and I feel that if the eyeshadow selection was done better, this palette would have been a bit better. Because how can you class this as a need? Like, why is a black like that a need rather than a want, when some of the shadows that were in her wants palette, I think, would have been better off in this palette? That is just my opinion on it. So I love the wants palette, and I love what was trying to happen with this palette, but I just think it fell a little bit short for me. So that's why I'm using that palette. For a palette you bought because of YouTube, that was a disappointment. The next one on the list is your favorite palette. Now, that is really difficult because I have quite a few palettes I like and I enjoy for different reasons. But I've decided I'm going to go with my Beauty Bay Bright Matte palette, the 9-pan palette. You might have remembered seeing this one in an earlier episode, because I really enjoyed using it and I really enjoyed the looks that I created, and I'm very, very happy with the brights in this palette. In fact, I have been tossing up the idea of getting their 16-pan palette, their 16-pan brights palette, but really at the moment, with the amount of brights that I have in my collection, I really do not need it, so I haven't, but I really enjoy this palette. So that is why I've classed it as my favorite. It's a good palette, and I would definitely recommend giving this brand a try if you are looking for a nice brights palette that is of a decent cost. This was only $10, so if you're looking for $10 Australian, I might add. So if you were looking for a decently priced brights palette with good pigmentation, definitely give this one a go. The next one on the list is a palette that reminds you of Santa Claus, be it color, theme, etc. So I decided to go with the Revolution Alexis Stone Instinct palette. Obviously it is because of the red color of the palette, and also it is one of the only palettes I have that has red shades in it. So I have decided to go with this palette because it reminds me, I guess, of Santa Claus. It isn't, I wouldn't say it's a very Christmassy palette, but when I was looking at a palette that reminded me of Santa Claus, this color especially definitely reminded me of Santa. And for the last palette of the year, we are going to be using a palette that brings in the new year, that it makes you feel new life, or it puts a prep in your step. I decided, because it's the end of the year, for one last push on my Pan That palette, which I'll put a link to that up here. So I decided instead that I would use my Pan That palette. As you can see, I'm covering up the shade I'm currently working on because I don't want to give away too many spoilers. But I want to give this one more push, one more, you know, prep before the new year, because as of next year, this will not be my Pan That palette. It will be going back into my collection to be used at a later date, but it won't be my Pan That palette, and I just want to give it a bit more love before the end of the year. So the last week of the year, I'm going to be working on this palette. So that is all the palettes left in the Pan Those Miraculous Palettes challenge that was created by Brandy, that I am doing in combination with the September, can we talk today? No, we cannot. The September Lippie challenge that was created by Samantha. So make sure you definitely check out the others involved with them. I do have them linked down below, as I said before. Let me know down in the comments if there's any palettes that you personally enjoyed seeing, you didn't enjoy seeing, you would like to hear more about, any that you would like me to do a focus video on. All of those lovely bits and bobs, let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this video up here. So I'm Verity. That was the 7th episode in the Lips versus Eyes challenge that I'm doing with Brandy, Shay and Samantha. And now to the outro.